So we start now with the second session, where I want to be able to look at, as we're going to look at a bit of the scriptures of Leviticus, to understand this he calls. So we need to understand, are we going to become this chosen generation, what he has just spoken in Exodus? Because in Exodus, he wanted to set them apart to be able to be a reign of priests and a set-apart nation. Those were the words that Moshe was to speak to the children of Israel and prepare them to be that. That has been his plan from the beginning. He hasn't changed his plan. He wants a set-apart people. He is the Yahuwah of Avram, Yitzhak, and Yaakov. That was going to bring about Yaakov becoming Israel. That was going to become the 12 tribes of Israel that were going to rule with Yahuwah. But for them to rule with Yahuwah, they need to be a people that keep his ways. They need to be a chosen generation. So let's look at Leviticus chapter 11. Leviticus chapter 11, 44 to 45. This is where we get an understanding, and it says, I am Yahuwah your Elohim, and you shall set yourselves apart, and you shall be set apart, for I am set apart. And do not defile yourselves with any swarming creature, the one creeping on the earth. For I am Yahuwah, who is bringing you up out of the land of Mitzrayim, to be your Elohim, and you shall be set apart, for I am set apart. So we need to understand what he's written in this book of Leviticus, where he's turning around, where he's saying, you are not to eat this because you are to be. He tells you everything. He gives you the whole breakdown in Leviticus chapter 11 of every food you should eat, food you shouldn't eat, that will make you unclean, that will make you not be clean before him. And then at the end of when he turns around and he says all of this, he says, for I am Yahuwah your Elohim, and you shall set yourselves apart, and you shall be set apart, for I am set apart. And you do not defile yourselves with any swarming creature, the one creeping on the earth. Now he's already told you things that you are to eat and things that you are not to eat. That's going to make you set apart and clean unto him. So, if you want to be able to say, but I am now this believer, I don't need to be able to keep any of these things, because at the end of the day, I have been set free from all of this, then you are not a called one. You are not a set apart one. You are not being made holy as he's holy, because he's already told you these are the things that you will not do. That's the first thing. So that's for us to be able to have an understanding. First and foremost, we better have an understanding that if he tells you you are not to do these things, then you need to understand, if that's what's going to make you set apart and holy, to be a priest unto him, then you need to understand that that is what he's saying. He is the one who is telling you what he says is unclean. Now you do not dictate to him and tell him, but that is now actually been made clean. Because Yahushua himself would have had to uphold this entire word from Genesis. He would have had to put it into practice. And if he did it, then so shall we. He never came to do away with anything. He came to fulfill it, which he came to uphold it, and then gave us his ruach, so that you now have no excuse why you should not have to do it. Because he understands, if you couldn't do it of your flesh, don't worry. I'm going to give you my ruach, and I'm going to write my laws and my Torah on your hearts now, and you have no excuse not to do it. That's basically how it works. So, he's the one who makes the rules, and we are the ones who abide by the rules. But then again, that's why he says, many are called. Because he's calling you in Leviticus. He's calling you in Vayikra. He calls, but you are the one that needs to choose to become set apart. The choice is yours. That's why he says many are called, few are chosen. Why are they chosen? Because they need to become the elect, which means they need to choose. Now we look at Leviticus chapter 10. Again, I'm just trying to make you understand the difference between when he calls and he says, I want you to be set apart. I'm bringing a distinction between clean and unclean and set apartness. And he says in Leviticus chapter 10, verses 8, I know you people know these scriptures. I'm bringing them all the time. But, repetition. Maybe you didn't get it in the last message. Maybe you didn't get it in the conference. Maybe you're going to get it now. I don't know. But I have to keep bringing these scriptures because he doesn't stop with these scriptures where I'm concerned. So, and Yahuwah spoke to Aaron saying, do not drink wine or strong drink, nor your sons with you when you go into the tent of appointment, lest you die, a law forever throughout your generations. Okay, when you went into the tent of appointment, because that was his dwelling place, that was his Mishkan. I have news for you today. Okay, there's no more Mishkan, there's no more dwelling place, there's no more tabernacle. So who becomes the tabernacle of the Father now? We do. He's got an earthly tabernacle that he wants to dwell in. Now, if he never wanted it in that tabernacle, and if he never wanted any unclean food in that tabernacle, neither does he want it in his earthly tabernacle that he wants to dwell in, which is your body. 1 Corinthians chapter 6. He says, so as to make the distinction between the set apart and the profane. So he says, do not drink wine or any strong drink. Do not bring it into this tabernacle. Do not bring it into my tent of appointment. A law forever throughout your generations. Now, if we are to become the living tabernacle of the Father, so if we go to 1 Corinthians chapter 6, because people will say to me, oh, Natalia, but you know what? That was the tabernacle in the wilderness. I mean, now we don't have a tabernacle. So let's just quickly go to 1 Corinthians chapter 6, and it says, and Yahuwah who raised the master, 1 Corinthians chapter 6 from verses 14 says, and the Yahuwah who raised the master shall also rise up through his power. Do you not know that your bodies are the members of Messiah? Shall I then take the member of Messiah and make them members of a whore? Let it not be. So should I now take the tabernacle of Messiah and make it together with alcohol, with drink, with wine, with strong drink? Do I do that? No, because Messiah would not have been allowed that. So if you want to believe that Messiah sat at the table and drank wine, and Messiah sat at the table and turned water into wine, that was alcohol wine, you have been deceived. Because at the end of the day, if you really go and research those scriptures, the wine that they talk about is the purest of the grape juice before it ferments. Fermentation is the corruption. And he says, do you not know that your bodies are the members of Messiah? Shall I then take the members of Messiah and make them members of a whore? Let it not be. Or do you not know that he who is joined to a whore is one body? But he says the two shall become one flesh. And he who is joined to the master is one spirit. Flee whoring. Every sin that a man does is outside the body, but he who commits whoring sins against his own body. Or do you not know? Listen carefully. Or do you not know that your body is the dwelling place of the set-apart Spirit who is in you, which you have from Yahuwah, and you are not your own? For you were bought with a price. Therefore, esteem Yahuwah in your body and in your set-apart spirit. So, if you are reading Leviticus, you need to understand that everything about Leviticus is where he calls for you to be able to serve him in a holy manner, in a set-apart way. He wants you to be set apart. He wants you to be a holy priesthood. We're going to look at that in a little bit deeper revelation. So, he says, do not drink wine or strong drink, nor you nor your sons, when you go into the tent of appointment, the dwelling place, the tabernacle, lest you die, a law forever throughout your generations, so as to make the distinction between the set apart and the profane, between the unclean and the clean. So he calls that unclean. Now listen. And to teach the children of Israel all the laws which Yahuwah has spoken to them by the hand of Moshe. So, if you saw it as unclean, it's unclean. Finished. End of story. You're not going to make it clean. I don't care if you want to sit and, like I said, if you are in the New Testament and you want to do these things and you want to discard the things that the fathers put, the foundations that the fathers put from the beginning, Yahushua came, upheld all of this. And therefore, he gives us his ruach so that we now have no excuse to become the called set apart ones. So you can choose. That's why I'm saying to you, the message that the Father wants me to speak is a message for a remnant. It's for an elect people. It's for those that are going to be his priests, that are going to enter into his Holy of Holies, that are going to reign and rule with him, that are going to be seated on thrones, that are going to rule with him, that will be pillars in his temple. Those are the ones that I'm talking to. So we've got to be equipped to become those people. And so we look at Leviticus chapter 19, verses 1 and 2. Let's go back to Leviticus 19. So you see, why does he have us reading all these things? We start to understand that when we see the priests and when the priests come and offer the sacrifices on the altar, what are they doing? They're making atonement. It's an intercession. So when we are priests, the Father calls us to be able to make intercession on behalf of those that are going astray. That is what an intercessor is. That is what a priest is. A priest is called to be able to make intercession on behalf of those that are going to go astray. So, let's look at Leviticus chapter 19, verses 1 and 2. And Yahuwah spoke to Moshe, saying, Speak to the congregation of the children of Israel, and say to them, Be set apart, for I, Yahuwah Yahuwah, am set apart. How many times does he say this in Leviticus alone? Be set apart, because I am set apart. So, do not turn to your idols and do not make for yourselves molded mighty ones. I am Yahuwah Yahuwah. So he wants us to turn to him. He wants us to seek him. Now we look at verse 37. So let's look at verse 37. It says, And you shall guard my laws and all my right rulings and do them. I am Yahuwah. And now, in this Leviticus, if we're going to get to Leviticus chapter 19, he starts to tell you the laws of how he wants you to be able to not mix seed. He doesn't want you to mix, like, sow this seed with this seed. Like people will take, I've heard of like people that take a orange tree and then plant it with a lemon tree or something like that to be able to bring a different kind of sweeter fruit or something like that. I don't know. All these things are forbidden in the Torah. He never wanted us to do that. He never wanted us to be able to mix certain wools. He never wanted us to mix wool and linen. He wanted us to be able to have linen, and he didn't want us to be able to mix the materials that you will go and interweave materials like wool and linen, weave it together. He never wanted that. He never wanted us to be able to mix these things. So the things that he tells us here, it's all for our own good at the end of the day, because when you really start looking at these things and the things that he tells you not to do, you will understand, why does he tell you not to eat these animals? Why does he tell you not to do these things? Why does he tell you not to mix these seeds? Why does he tell you that? Because at the end of the day, all of this is going to be detrimental to your health in the end of the day. And so these things is why he's telling you, do not mix these animals, do not breed these animals, because if you have to mix these animals, you are going to be able to then tamper with nature, and you will produce something in the end that is going to be to your destruction. So, Father never wanted us to be able to have hybrids. And now we interbreed certain of the animals, and we're bringing these funny animals, and they're doing this in labs and everything. And the Father's looking down on heaven, from heaven, and I can tell you now, this is not pleasing to him. Because he tells you not to do it. And then in Leviticus is when he starts to tell you how to be able to keep the Sabbath, that you are to keep the Sabbath, that you are to set it apart as pure and holy unto him. He tells you that he wants you to be able to keep his feasts. He wants you to keep feasts. We look at Leviticus chapter 20, verses 22, and it says, "And you shall guard all my laws and all my right rulings, and do them, so that the land where I am bringing you to dwell does not vomit you out." So now tell me, how are you going to be able to go into the land that he's going to give? So how are you going to reign and rule with him in his millennial reign, that you are going to be in the city with him, reigning and ruling? That's why he says outside. And that's why he says many are going to come in that day and say, "Yahushua, but we cast out demons." He says, "Depart from me, I do not know you." Because at the end of the day, we need to understand, he's given you instructions, just like it was in the Garden of Eden. He gave instructions, one instruction, and we didn't keep the instruction. Were we allowed to stay in that garden? No, we went outside. And so it is going to be that we can think that we are doing all these things, and yet we will not be obedient to him. Now understand, you need to understand one thing. You know what? This is what my Bible says, and it says this, I think it's it talks about, I think it's in Revelation chapter 19, that he says those who died before the tribulation, they are not going to come back. Only those who will die in the tribulation, they are going to be those that are going to reign and rule. And so at the end of the day, many people say to me, "But Natalia, what happens to all those people that didn't keep the Torah? What happens to them now?" And I said, their books will be open and they will be judged. But this was not a message that was for that dispensation. Well, it was a message that's been in the Bible all along. This is what was supposed to be taught us, but unfortunately, this is not what we've been taught. Our dispensation has not been taught. But now, for the last 30, 40, 50 years, this message has been taught. And the thing is that it's becoming more and more the message that's having to be taught. Why? Because those that are going to have to reign and rule with Messiah Yahushua, this is what they will be keeping, because we are coming into the promised land. And if we do not keep these things, the land will vomit us out, is what it says. So in Zechariah chapter 14, it tells you very clearly that if you do not keep the Feast of Tabernacle, there will be no rain on your land. And that is already in the millennial reign. That is not a message that is being spoken for now. And that is sometimes what makes the books of the prophets, why people get very confused with the books of the prophets, because the books of the prophets can one minute be speaking something that's going to be like now, then it can be speaking something that's already happened, and then it can be speaking something that's going to be of the millennial reign. And then it can be speaking something that's already happened, but that is going to repeat itself again. And that is why we need the Ruach of Yahuwah to help us to be able to go deeper with His scripture so that we may understand seasons and times. Nobody knows the hour, nobody knows the day, but He says very clearly you ought to know the season that you are in. When you see the fig tree having to blossom, you know the season that it is. When you see these things, you ought to know the season that it is. You're not going to know the day, you're not going to know the hour, but you ought to know the season that you are in. So, we are called to be set apart as He's set apart. We are called to be set apart. Peter was speaking to the lost tribes of the house of Israel, and we're going to look at this in 1 Peter 1, verses 1 to 8. And so, we have understood that the Father spoke. When I said to you, Yaakov's name was changed to Israel because the Father is now bringing together a house of Israel. He's bringing a remnant from Yehudah and the remnant from Israel, and He's going to have one house because there's a house that's got to be established. So that's why I say, I don't understand. If you are just in a church and you are not being returning back to the house, then where are you? And that is why we have a work to do, because we have a message that we are to speak to the people. So, 1 Peter. Chapter 1, verses 1 to 8 says, and Kepha, an emissary of Yahushua, Messiah, to the chosen, the elect, those who made the choice, strangers of the dispersion. So listen carefully. He is an emissary of Yahushua, Messiah, to the elect strangers of the dispersion in Pontus, Galatia, Cappadocia, Asia, Bithynia. So these were those lost tribes that were out in the nations. They were not in the nation of Israel. They were not in Israel. And he was going out and speaking to these people. He's writing a letter to those that are the chosen. They are those that have made the choice to follow the Father. They are those that have made the choice. That they've heard the call. In Leviticus, he called, and they are now making the decision to follow him. And he says, look how he starts. Chosen according to the foreknowledge. So he says, to the chosen. And that word chosen, like I said, is the word for choice. They make a choice. You make a choice and you become the elect. So there is an elect group of people that have made a choice. So choosing to be saved by Yahushua Mashiach, you need to understand what was his reason for coming. To set us free from sin. What is sin? Sin is the violation, missing the mark and the violation of his law, and bringing us back to that which we were not able to do out of our flesh. And now, by having received him as our Messiah, we receive the Ruach of Yahuwah, and then we are able to come back to have Torah written upon the tablets of our heart. And now we can keep his word, because it's not by our flesh, but the Spirit works it in us, both to will and to do his good pleasure. So, chosen according to the foreknowledge of Yahuwah the Father. Now listen, set apart by the Ruach unto obedience. So you see, we are being set apart into obedience. Obedience to what? Obedience to this word. We don't just, we need to understand something. We don't just have faith in faith. We have to have faith in the word. When it was accredited unto Abraham to be the man of faith, he had been put to the test, and he'd been making decisions and choices to follow the Father. In his testing and trialing, he was being obedient until he came to the last test. And that's what was accredited to him, faith, because he trusted the Father, believed in him, unto the point of having to put his own son to death. It's not faith in faith. It's faith in his word, in who he is, not just in what he does. We have faith in who he is. And even if he doesn't do it, and we're going to get there a little bit later as we look at Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, we're going to look at this. Because today we are going to cover a lot of things. So, chosen. So we've made the choice according to the foreknowledge of Yahuwah. So that chosen is the elect. We are the elect, chosen to the foreknowledge of Yahuwah, the Father, set apart. We need to be set apart by the Ruach. So the Ruach comes to do what? Set us apart. Set us apart into what? Into his word. Because what was it that was, okay, let's just go back. Let me take you back. Let me not rush. Let me take you back. Okay, Mount Sinai. What were they going to be prepared to receive on Mount Sinai? He said, cleanse them, for 3 days, let them cleanse themselves, to be able to appear before me, so that I may be able to give them my instructions, and then I will be able to have a holy priesthood, a chosen people that will be a priesthood for me to the nations. A holy, set-apart people that would be my set-apart, chosen people, a nation of priests. That's what he wanted. So they were going to receive the Holy Spirit then, to be able to walk in the commands that he was going to give them, the instructions that he was going to give them, and how he wanted to be served. There and then they would not have had to go through all of this that they went through, because at the end of the day, he would have written those instructions on the tablets of their hearts, just like he did with Abraham, just like he did with Isaac, just like he did with Yaakov. He would have done it with them. No different. He was going to give them his Ruach. And so when he would have given them his Ruach, then they would have been set apart by the Ruach into obedience, because it's the Ruach who sets us apart to the Father by helping us to become obedient to him. It's not even of our flesh. We do it of his Ruach. And the sprinkling of the blood of Yahushua, favor and peace be increased to you. So you see, because we are being set apart into obedience, because the blood of Yahushua has already been shed to bring us into what? Into obedience, so that we can become that set apart people unto the Father, that will become the chosen elect ones that he wants. Do you understand? I've gone like backwards here, but I'm giving you the full picture. Blessed be Yahuwah, the Father of our Master Yahushua, who according to his great compassion has caused us to be born again to a living expectation through the resurrection of Yahushua Mashiach from the dead. So by Mashiach being died and resurrected, we are now received the Ruach of Yahuwah to be able to now come and help us to become the obedient children that are called and are able to obey his word and his instructions. To an inheritance incorruptible and undefiled and unfading, having been kept in the heavens for you. So we have an inheritance, and the inheritance is this, that we're going to have to inherit the promised land that he wants to give us when he comes and reigns and rules. Who are protected by the power of Yahuwah through the belief. So we need to have faith in who he is. That is our protection, is our faith in him. That no matter what he says, we will do what he says irrespective. That is our protection. Faith in this word. For a deliverance ready to be revealed at his last time. So you see, at his coming, there is going to be a great deliverance for those who have put their trust and their faith in him. When he appears, those are the ones that he's going to gather unto himself. When he comes, in which you exalt, even though for a little while, if need be, you have been grieved by many trials. So you see, this is why these trials have to come, because you must understand, Leviticus is there to give you instructions, and then you're going to be tested on those instructions, whether you're going to keep them or whether you're not. So we need to get this order of understanding of what this walk of ours is all about. In order that the proving of your belief, much more precious than gold, perishes and proven by fire. So our belief in him, so our faith that we say we have, So if you say you have faith, you are going to have to put that faith to the test. That faith will be tested. If you say that you believe him, if you say that you trust him, that faith that you say that you have will be put to the test. And that was the whole test of Abraham. That's why, for me, Abraham is one of the most powerful stories that really give me such courage and such hope. Because, Abraham did not start off as being anything but being faithful to the Father. He definitely did not start off as a man of faith. Far from it. And he made many mistakes. But praise the Father, he grew in his relationship with ABBA YAWHUAH. And as he grew in his relationship with ABBA YAWHUAH, this is how the Father brought about a man that was then able to become the father of faith. When he was able to get to the place of saying, when he received the instruction to say, now you need to go sacrifice your only son. Can you imagine? Can you just, put yourself in Abraham's shoes. That could not have been easy. It's one thing when you read a story. It's another thing when you got to live it. And that's why I'm saying we can all read this Bible and we can all say, oh, I really love him. Oh, you know what? I worship him. But you know what? The only time that you are really going to be able to know that you do is when you're going to be put to that test. And this is the thing. There are many, many people who worship him with their lips, but their hearts are far from him. And that is why there's going to be a great falling away. The Bible talks in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2 that there is a great falling away. And this is what we're going to look at. So, in order that the proving of your belief, much more precious than gold, that perishes and proven by fire, might be found to result in praise and respect and esteem and glory at the revelation of Yahushua Mashiach. So when Yahushua comes, that faith, that belief is going to have to be proved by fire, like gold. Like gold is refined by fire, so are we going to have to be refined by fire to prove that we truly have the faith and the belief in him. Whom having not seen, you love, in whom you exult with unspeakable and esteem joy, yet not seeing, but believing. So, at the end of the day, we need to understand that we love him even though we've never seen him. And are we going to be willing to lay our lives down because we love him? And these are the tests that are going to come our way, and these are the things that we're going to look at very clearly. So Leviticus is about him calling us to be holy, to be set apart, sanctified unto him. That's what Leviticus is going to be is about. And this is exactly what we are reading here in Peter, because in 1 Peter 1 verses 14, let's look at 1 Peter 1:14, and we're going to read from 14 to 23. It says, as obedient children, not conforming yourselves to the former lusts in your ignorance. So you see, before we were still children of the world and followed the lusts of our flesh and did the things of the lusts of our flesh. Whatever our flesh wanted to do, we do. This sounds good to me, let me do it. No seeking the Father, is it his will, is it? No, it sounds good, let me do this. That's not the way the children of Yahuwah go about doing things. We are not our own. We've been bought with a price. We've read that. You've been bought with a price. You are not your own. You don't do as you want. You don't go as where you want. You don't do what you want. You are bought with a price. You are his. Instead, as the one who called you is set apart, so you also should become set apart in all behavior. So there you go. So at the end of the day, you see Leviticus is bringing you to a place, or he's giving you a lot of instructions in food you should eat, food you shouldn't eat, in to keep the Sabbath, and to be able to keep his feasts and how to keep his feasts. And Leviticus chapter 23 tells you all about the feasts that he wants you to keep, and it tells you how you shouldn't mix when you sow your seed, you are not to mix the seed, you are not to mix certain materials, you're not to mix the materials, because he tells you all these things. But when we go into the New Testament, into the renewed covenant, we start looking a little bit deeper at this corruptible flesh man with the flesh ways and the flesh lusts and the lusts of the flesh, which is not spoken so much of in the foundational covenant. But in the renewed covenant, we start looking at this being set apart by being able to crucify the works of the flesh. That's why it says you are not to join yourself to a whore. You are not to be part of the worldly lusts, the drunkenness and the parties and the debauchery and homosexuality and all these things. We are not to do this. And so it goes a lot deeper, because we start looking at the flesh nature. And these are the things that Peter addresses. These are the things that Paul addresses. And these are the things that they're constantly telling us to be able to crucify those things of our flesh. So we continue to read, because we're reading up to verse 23. And it says, because it has been written, be set apart, for I am set apart. So he says, instead, as one who has called you is set apart, so you also should become set apart in all behavior. So it is a process that he wants to set you apart in all behavior. And this is what we're going to look at. You are not just going to be set apart in all your behavior unless you're going to be able to go through these tests. And that is why we are going to look at these scriptures. And in our foundational covenant, we will understand that they had to go through many tests to expose the wickedness of their own hearts. And we're going to be looking at this. Because it has been written, be set apart be set apart, for I am set apart. And if you call on the Father, who without partiality judges according to each one's work, pass the time of your sojourning in fear. So understand, he's going to judge the works of your hands, the work that he says sees the things that you do. So are you about your own things? Are you about the Father's things? What are you about? Are you gaining things in this world that's got to do with the lust of your flesh and the lust of your eyes? Or are you about what he wants and his kingdom things? What are you about? I'm not saying that you have to leave your job or leave any. Well, at this point in time, I mean, it's like, who's got jobs anyway? So I'm saying, are you even in your job about the kingdom of the Father? Or about a job because you need a job to put food on the table? What are you doing? Because everything that we do should be for the glory and the honor of his name. Knowing that you were redeemed from your futile behavior, inherited from your fathers, not with what is corruptible, silver or gold, but with the precious blood of the Messiah, as of a lamb unblemished and spotless. So understand, the blood of Yahushua Mashiach has come to set you free from that sinful nature that we have within us. And he's given us the Ruach of Yahuwah so that we have no excuse in order to be able to say no to the worldly lusts and our fleshly ways. Foreknown indeed before the foundations of the world, but manifested in these last days for your sakes. So you see, but with the precious blood of Messiah, as of the Lamb unblemished and spotless, foreknown indeed before the foundations of the world, but was made manifest. So he was already there all the time, even in the time of the foundational covenant. Yahushua was there. But now He's been made manifest in the last times for your sakes. Who brought him belief in Yahuwah, who raised him from the dead and gave him glory, gave him esteem, so that your belief and expectation are in Yahuwah. So our belief and our expectation is in Yahuwah himself. Now that you have cleansed your lives in obeying the truth. So you see, how do we cleanse our lives? The only way to cleanse your life is when you come back to truth. And that is why he said to me, you need to be able to be. That's why in John chapter 17, verses 17 to 19 says, we are sanctified in truth. We are set apart in truth. The more of his word we know, the more of his truth we know, the more set apart we become. You don't just automatically become set apart. It's his truth that sets you apart. And how do you get that? Through many trials and many tests. So obeying the truth through the Spirit to unfeigned brotherly love, love one another fervently with a clean heart. So, with a clean heart. Having been born again, not of corruptible seed, but incorruptible, through the living word of Yahuwah, which remains forever. So, we are this, we are being born again, not of the corruptible seed, but of the incorruptible, which Yeshua was incorruptible, through the living word of Yahuwah, which remains forever. So, this living word of Yahuwah is the incorruptible seed that comes to cleanse us into obedience into him. We need to come into obedience, and it sets us apart. So, we need to be set apart as he set apart and know his love. So, what is set apartness? What is holiness? That is the word sanctification. He wants to sanctify us. He wants us to come into the sanctification. And that is the word hagiosmos, which means set apart. Being set apart from all else and dedicated to Yahuwah's use. So even if you're in your job, you are being set apart for his use. In your job. So you need to understand, what job does he have you in? He's got a purpose and a plan for you in that job. You need to be a light for those people that are around you, so that they may come to know who Yahuwah is through your good works, through the way that you live your life, through the fact that when they say to you, oh, do you want to come and party with us and have a drink? And sorry, I don't drink. Sorry, I don't smoke. Sorry, I don't do these things. And you don't swear like they do. You don't party like they do. You're not part of the things that they are part of. This is what we need to understand. So, what is set apart unto Yahuwah is not contaminated. That which is set apart unto Yahuwah is not contaminated by the corruption of the world and its influence. So we need to understand, what is set apart to the Father will not be contaminated by the corruption of the world. And this is important that you know, because this is the hour that we're coming into. We are being bought with a price by the incorruptible seed and by the blood of Yeshua Mashiach, which is very precious, and we are not going to trample it underfoot. And therefore, we need to understand that that which is wholly set apart unto him, in purity, we are not going to be part of the corruption of the things of the world. So when they say to you, no, come and sit down, we're going to have this braai or whatever. Sorry, I don't eat that meat. Or, please just make sure that my meat is a little bit more well done, because I don't want the blood running out of that meat, because I want my meat more dead than what I want all this blood in it. Do you understand? Because these are the things that we have learned. In the things that when he called, in the book of Leviticus, he called, and we had to make a choice to become his elect ones, because he calls many, but few choose to obey. So 1 Peter 2 verse 9 says, but you are a chosen race. Let's read first 1 Peter 2 verses 1 to 5. Says, having been put aside then all evil and all deceit. So, having put aside all evil and all deceit and hypocrisies and envying and all evil words. As newborn babes desire the unadulterated milk of the word. You see, we are to desire the truth in our innermost parts, and this is the unadulterated milk of the word, in order that you grow by it. So we need the unadulterated truth of his word, so that we can grow by it. If indeed you have tasted that the Master is good, drawing near to him a living stone, rejected indeed by men, but chosen by Yahuwah and precious. So you see, man can reject you, it doesn't matter, as long as you are chosen by ABBA YAWHUAH. Because you've made the choice to follow him. Therefore you are the chosen, you are the elect. You also, as living stones, are being built up a spiritual house, a set-apart priesthood, to offer up spiritual slaughter offerings acceptable to Yahuwah through the Master, through Yahushua Messiah. So look, and you also are living stones. Now let's just understand this word. You also are living stones, are being built up. So we are the tabernacle of the living stones that are being built up. A spiritual house. So understand, when these living stones come together, when these elect people that are set apart unto the Father, that are walking in his truths, that are walking in his ways, when they all start coming together, they form a spiritual house, a set-apart priesthood. We become that set-apart priesthood, because remember, he doesn't have a temple made by man's hands. He's got a temple made of this fleshly temples that we have, which is a spiritual house. We become the house that is to have his presence indwelling. A set-apart priesthood. We now become the priesthood that is there to serve. We become a priest for him. To offer up spiritual slaughter offerings. Now, what are those spiritual slaughter offerings acceptable to Yahuwah through Messiah Yahushua? Now, what offerings? Because at the end of the day, we don't do any offerings at the moment. Okay, so let's go look at Hebrews chapter 5. Here, let's look and see. For every priest taken from among men is appointed on behalf of men in matters relating to Yahuwah, to offer both gifts and offerings for sins. Now I ask you, how the heck? We don't do any slaughter offerings. We don't do any of these offerings. So what offerings do we do? And it says, being able to have a measure of feeling for those not knowing and being led astray, since he himself is also surrounded by weakness. So you see, just like they are going to sin and fall, so do we, because we have the same weakness. Now look at this. On account of this, he has to offer for sins as for the people, so also for himself. And no one obtains this esteem for himself, but he who is called by Yahuwah, even as Aaron also was. So he's called, and then he chooses to become a priest in being obedient to the Father, in keeping his ways, and then he becomes a priest to offer offerings for him. And how does he do that? Through his prayers, through his intercession. No longer are we offering things like that, because look and see what happens here. Let's look and see. So it says in verse 8. Yeah. Let's look and see. Let's continue to read from verse. So we are in Hebrews chapter 5 from verse 5. So also the Messiah did not extol himself to become high priest, but it was he who said to him, "You are my son, today I have brought you forth." And he also says in another place, "You are a priest forever according to the order of Melchizedek," who in the days of his flesh, when he had offered up prayers and petitions with strong crying and tears to him who was able to save him from death, and was heard because of his reverent fear. So you see, what is it that we need to do? Through tears and through petitions and through prayers, though being a son. Now listen carefully. This is what we need to understand. Though being a son, he learned obedience by what he suffered. So, how do we learn obedience? By what we suffer. If we are not going to suffer, we will not understand what it means to truly be obedient. And how do we then become the priest for the Father? Now listen. And having been perfected, he became the causer of everlasting deliverance to all those obeying him. So at the end of the day, true love is obedience to all Yahuwah puts us through. To suffer for doing good, to become a true intercessor and a priest. How do you become an intercessor and a priest and stand in the gap for someone else when you yourself have been through nothing? Let me tell you something. When one has had to go through a difficult time of understanding what it means to not have food, what it means to not have finances coming into the house, when you've been through that test, then you know how to take the bit of money that you might have and you're going to go and give it to people who need it. Or you're going to go buy food for those who need it. Let me tell you something. I had a lady stay with me. I'll never forget. She and her 4 children came and lived in the back room of my house because she had nowhere to stay. She was living in one of these dilapidated houses that had no windows, no door. It was winter, it was cold, and I was going there trying to help her, giving her food, giving her things, and there was no water, there was no electricity. It was very difficult. She was in one of these abandoned houses with her 4 children. And the father spoke to me and he said to me, "Your back room is going to be better than where she's living right now. I want you to fetch her. I want you to fetch her 4 children, and I want you to bring them and let them stay in your back room in your garden." And so we fixed up that room and everything, and I brought her to come and stay with me. And I'll never forget, there was an older man that I was helping that also had been kicked out of his house. He had nowhere to go. These were the people that the father kept bringing across my path. And anyway, he came and he had nothing. Literally, he had his bag with his clothes. That's all he had. He had lost everything and he had nowhere to go. And so anyway, I brought him onto Mount Zion at Beulah Park. There was like a room there, and I said, "Fine, we'll put him there, we'll pay for the room, and we will have him stay there." And then I had to go buy him a kettle and, bought him food. And let me tell you something. This friend of mine that was staying in my back garden, Vicky, she was working at the time, and so that's why I needed her to be able to have her salary, to be able to save her salary so that she could save up some money to be able to then have a proper deposit or whatever on a flat where her and her children could finally go to, but she just needed a break. And so that's why the father said, "Bring her in and help her." And when I told her about this man, that day after work, she took her little bit of money And she went and bought these groceries to be able to take it to him. You see, the poor know how to give to the poor. You know why? Because they know what it's like to go without. But I find that many times the rich do not know how to give, because they don't know what it means to suffer. But when we have been through that test, when we have suffered, we know what it's like to stand in intercession prayer for that, because we know what it's like. So therefore, it was no problem for her to go and take her little bit of money and go buy all these groceries. She came home and she says, Natalia, I've got these groceries. I said, what is this for? She said, for Gigi. I said, I didn't tell you to go buy anything. No, I want to give him these groceries. I know what it's like. She knew what it was like to be in that place, to not have food, to not have anything, because she herself had lost everything. She knew what that was like. So how do you have compassion for someone else when you yourself have been through nothing? And that is why I'm saying there are those that the Father has laid in their hearts, and even if they haven't been through the test, they have the compassion of Abba Father, because they have His love and they have His heart, and they know what it means to be able to lay down their lives for others, because that's what we're called to do. That's what the true love of Yahuwah is. And let me tell you something, that is what we're coming to now, like it was in the book of Acts. When they brought what they had, and they brought it to the disciples, and the disciples distributed it amongst those who had need. It's the way it was done then. So, what is the Father busy doing? He wants to raise up a priesthood. And this priesthood is able to offer intercession prayer. Intercession prayer. And look at what happens. And having been perfected, once you go through that trial, because he learned obedience through his suffering. So if we want obedience to his word, we are not going to know the fullness of the obedience to his word until we have to suffer. And having been perfected, he became the causer of everlasting deliverance to all those obeying him. So at the end of the day, you will become a deliverance for someone else. When you have suffered in that area, you become a deliverer for someone else, because you have gone through that, and therefore you can help that other person go through it as well. And so we look at the fact that, like he says, he is raising up this people, these living stones that are going to have to come together to be able to build his Mishkan, that are going to be these priests. And the Father speaks about this in Isaiah chapter 43. Let's go look at Isaiah chapter 43. Where there's a set apart people, a holy nation, those whom he's going to raise up in this hour, those who are going to praise him. And this is because they are an obedient people. They are a set apart people. They are a holy people, ones that have been set apart. So we look at Isaiah chapter 43. Let's look at from verses 18 to 21. Do not remember the former events, nor consider the events of old. See, I'm doing what is new. Let it now spring forth. Do you not know it? I am even making a way in the wilderness and rivers in the desert. So at the end of the day, in the next session, we are going to cover this wilderness. He will make a way in the wilderness and rivers in the desert. The beasts of the field esteem me, the jackals and the ostriches, because I have given water in the wilderness and rivers in the desert to give drink to my people, my chosen, my elect. And who are those? Those that have made a choice to hear the call and to obey, even through suffering. This people I have formed for myself, let them relate my praise. They will become a holy priesthood, a holy nation. Now we look at 1 Peter 2, verse 9. Let's see. Sorry, I should have just told you, like myself, keep your finger there. (1 Peter 2 verse 9) says, but you are a chosen race. Okay, should we see? Okay. 1 Peter 2 verse 9. But you are a chosen race, a royal priesthood, a set-apart nation, a people for a possession, that you shall proclaim the praises of him who called you out of darkness into his marvelous light. Did we just read that? Isaiah chapter 43 verse 21, that says a set-apart people called to praise him, a holy priesthood, a set-apart people, a chosen generation, a chosen priesthood, ones who are going to be obedient to his will and to his way. And it says, a people for a possession, that you should proclaim. So it's a priesthood, a chosen race. Chosen. Ones who have chosen. It's an elect. Many are called, few are chosen. That word chosen is the word that says that they choose, they make a choice. To make a choice, to choose. So you make a decision to choose to follow him in obedience to his word. A set-apart nation, a people for a possession, that you should proclaim the praises of him who called you out of darkness into his marvelous light. Because he is going to raise up a people that are going to truly praise him, even in the midst of the darkest hour. They will praise him. They will worship him. And so we praise Abba Father. This is a priesthood that he wanted. But how do we become this holy priesthood? We need to choose to follow. We need to shama, which is to listen and obey. Shema. Listen and obey. Hear and obey. That's why he takes us into the wilderness. So what is the next one that we will look at? The wilderness. So I'm going to do another session that will be the wilderness.